Okay, so now we're just going to continue to practice with the sine and the cosine curve, because again, these are crucially important. So, first one, graph on the interval negative 2 pi to 2 pi, this function. So notice that this is not saying graph 2 periods. Now maybe it'll end up being 2 periods, maybe it won't. Who knows? Maybe it'll be more, maybe it'll be less, maybe it'll be exactly 2. I don't know. You're not going to know that until you find what the period is and everything else. So I want you to go ahead and you're going to start this the same exact way, except for now, instead of drawing an axis all going to the right, you're going to draw an axis that includes from negative 2 pi to 2 pi. But first, find your amplitude, your period, your horizontal shift, your vertical shift, your intervals, all that fun stuff. So go ahead and do that. Unpause when you're ready to check. Alright, so this is what our graph should look like. It actually ends up only being one period because the graph was, or had a period of 4 pi. Now, what's our other information? Vertical shift was 0, amplitude is 1/4, horizontal shift is 0, period was 4 pi, the intervals are pi. So now normally this would have, when we say starting x value, we would have started at 0. So since it was a negative a value, we went down first and then back up. So this was only half of a period, but then because we were graphing from negative 2 pi to 2 pi, we had to go the other direction, and that gives us the other half of the period. So we end up with one full period of the sine curve. Next, I want you to graph 2 periods, y equals negative 2 cosine pi x over 2. Pause the video, unpause when you're ready to check your graph. Alright, so here we end up with a vertical shift of 0, amplitude of 2, period is 4, therefore the intervals are 1, and the horizontal shift is 0. It is a negative cosine function because of the negative 2 in front. So I start my starting x value is 0. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So remember that's actually 9 locations. And because of the negative, I start down at 0, negative 2, because my amplitude was 2, then on the middle, then up, back to the middle, and then down. Repeat, and I'm done. Looks like you guys are getting the hang of this. Let's try another. Graph 2 periods. Pause the video. Unpause when you are ready to check. Alright, so our graph should look like this. There was a vertical shift of down 1, so I drew my new axis. The amplitude was 3, so I went up to positive 2, down to negative 4. The horizontal shift was pi fourths. The intervals were pi eighths. Period was pi halves. There's all my information. So I start at pi fourths, and I add pi eighths from there. And this was a positive cosine curve. So I start up at the maximum, so at pi fourths I start at 2, then back on the line, then down, back on the line, up, and repeat. Alright. Next, now we're going to try working backwards. So what if you are given the graph, write an equation? So I will give you a hint. The process is almost exactly the same. Identify the vertical shift, identify the horizontal shift. Well, let me back up. Identify the vertical shift, identify the amplitude, identify the period. The horizontal shift you are going to actually choose. So, yeah. And then try to write an equation from there. Keep in mind that depending on where you start, it could change whether it's a positive or negative cosine or sine curve. You are also trying to write a sine and a cosine curve for this. So all of the information should be exactly the same with the exception of the horizontal shift. That's my hint. So I want you to pause the video and try that. Unpause when you're ready to check. Alright, so here, again, the first thing you want to do is identify the vertical shift. So I can see that the highest point was at 1, the lowest point is at negative 3. What's halfway in between that? It's negative 1. So I know my vertical shift is negative 1. Also, as soon as I figure that out, then I know from negative 1 I went up to positive 1, I went down to 3, so I know my amplitude is 2. Now the period might be a little more work. On this one, hopefully it wasn't too bad, but I can actually visually see this was one complete cycle of sine. So that was pretty easy for me to see. And that is a distance of pi, so I know the period is pi. Other ways on some of them like this where it might be a little more difficult is maybe look at 2 consecutive peaks and I see this was at pi fourths and this is at negative 3 pi fourths. So again, the distance between them is pi, or two consecutive valleys, negative pi fourths and 3 pi fourths, the distance between them is pi. Other times it can be a little more complicated. But anyway, I find that the period is 2. Or I'm sorry, the period is pi, which then leads me to my b value, which is 2. Okay? So now remember to find, normally we are given the b value, and normally we know that 2 pi over b equals the period. Well, if you just rearrange this equation, if you multiply by b and divide by period, you also know that 2 pi over the period equals b. So 2 pi over pi is 2. Alright, now I have to write an equation. So what I need to do is I need to figure out a horizontal shift for sine and then for cosine. So let's start with the sine function. Well, with sine, I know it always has to start somewhere on my midline. My midline is my vertical shift. So I could pick negative pi halves, 0, pi halves, and pi. I want to make this as easy on myself as possible. I like to make things easy, right? Why would I make them more difficult? So 0, if that's an option, is always going to be the easiest option. So I chose a horizontal shift of 0. So if I start at 0, then my equation can be 2 sine of 2x minus 1. It's a positive sine curve if I start here. If I started here, I would have to have a negative in front, or if I started here, I would have to have a negative in front. I could also remember the negative 1 or the minus 1 can be written at the end or in the beginning. So that's how I came up with the sine curve. Now for cosine, it's a little bit different. So everything's the same, the vertical shift, the amplitude, and the period, and the b value, but now I have to pick a horizontal shift of either a peak or a valley. Now if I pick a peak, it's going to be a positive cosine curve. If I pick a valley, it will be a negative cosine curve. And when I'm saying positive versus negative, I mean the a value. So I chose pi fourths. So the easiest way to do this is to say, okay, y equals 2 cosine of, and then put your b value outside the parentheses, and then parentheses x minus pi fourths, and then minus 1. Now, this is, again, we talked about this maybe the last videos, but how the b value can be written outside the parentheses, and when the b value is, then it's b times x minus c over b. So if I'm trying to write the equation, it's going to be much easier for me to write the b value out here, and then this will be my horizontal shift. If I want the b value to be inside, then this becomes a pi halves. That should make sense, because I can check this. If I set 2x minus pi halves equal to 0 and solve for x, I get a horizontal shift of pi fourths. So either of these are correct. The first one here, let me back up. These are the same exact equation. The top one just has the b value factored out. The bottom one has the b value distributed. Personally, I think the top version is much easier to write if I'm trying to write the equation. However, both of them are correct. Okay, so now that you saw the previous one, if you struggled with that, now I want you to try this. So same thing. I want to write both a sine and a cosine equation for the following graph. But start the same way, find your vertical shift, your amplitude, your period, and then decide on what you want the horizontal shift to be for each. Pause the video, unpause when you're ready to check. Alright, so here I can see that the vertical shift was 1, the amplitude was 3, and the period is 2, which means the b value is pi. And again, the way I figured out the period here was I looked at, okay, this is negative 0.75, this is 1.25, the distance between them is 2. Alright, so now for sine, I chose a starting x value of 3/4. So I wrote my sine equation as y equals 3 sine of pi times the quantity x minus 3/4, and then plus 1. So again here I chose to factor the b value out. Other potential starting sine values would be negative 1/4. Then this would have had to be a negative sine function because it's going down first. And then I would have had plus 1/4 right here. You could have also done negative 1.25, then it would be a positive sine curve, or you could have done positive 1.75, and that would be a negative sine curve. For cosine, I chose to start up here at negative 3/4 because I wanted a positive cosine curve, but you could have done positive 1/4 and then it would have been a negative cosine curve. But the a value is the same, b value is the same, and then I have x plus 3/4 and then plus 1. Again, there are many correct options. Technically, there's an infinite amount of them. You would probably just, there's a few main ones you would probably pick out. Alright, that's it for today. Good talk.